Welcome. Welcome to the webinar, and we are going to talk about non-obvious megatrends today. And it is the presentation that I was going to give actually at South by Southwest, which unfortunately for many of us was canceled. And we were all really looking forward to that moment, but I thought it'd be nice to just share some of the content around the megatrends and just give you a little bit of insight into what I was thinking about the trends. And the first question that I know a lot of people asked was, is this still relevant now? Because a lot of stuff has changed. And what I thought I would do is take you through some of the ways that things have changed and maybe just look at the world as it is now. And I was tempted, I have to say, to change around some of the content and to really try and address the fact that some of the stuff maybe doesn't seem as relevant, right? Like, can I even put a picture of a restaurant up when so many restaurants are closed, right? And I thought, I don't want to change too much, but I do want to reflect how the world's changing and sort of my shifting view of that. And so, we're in a moment of disruption, and for some of us that means maybe streaming more hours of programming and entertainment than perhaps we should. But what I started thinking about, and what I really got me kind of excited about sharing some of these ideas and these megatrends with you in this particular session now, is something that I think I've seen across many different channels and many different places, which is one of the biggest problems that has escalated in the world right now, is that people are rejecting what they don't understand. And there's a lot that we don't understand right now. And perhaps it makes this idea of us needing a different way of thinking even more urgent than it was before. And I thought what I'd try and do is offer a couple of hopeful notes about the future, because so many things are in flux. I'm sure that your work situation has changed, your life, your personal situation's probably changed. And there's a couple of things I want to try and offer in this webinar, aside from taking you through the 10 megatrends, and some of you are longtime readers of the Non-Obvious platform, and so these trends from the past, and perhaps you've even read the new book already. But there's a couple of things I want to try and do, and I shifted it a little bit from what I maybe would have done if we were together at South by Southwest. The first one is to try and remember that it's a moment in time where the smartest people are the ones who will start investing in learning. Not necessarily investing a lot of money, although you may spend money, but investing your time, because chances are you have a little more time than perhaps you had before. And a lot of my friends who are authors are saying, well, now I'm going to start on that next book. I'm going to start on that next project. I'm going to start on that new thing. And that can be pretty empowering to think about that. And so that's the first big thing that I'll be doing, which is investing in getting smarter and paying attention to more stuff. I'm also actively looking for ways to be a little more optimistic. And if you read my weekly email this morning, I tried to share some stories of optimism, like some things to be happy about, some things to feel hope about, because looking at some of the stories right now, it just seems like those are well hidden, if not missing. I think it's a moment where we have the chance to help someone else. Aside from us worrying about our professional futures, there are people who probably rely on you for their career, for their professional future. And so we have responsibilities to other people too. And if we can think about ways to help them financially or otherwise, it's an important thing, because it'll keep us together as people. And the other last thing that I find a lot of hope in is that we as humans, like everything that we do is in a cycle, right? And I remember when I used to work in marketing agencies, we would always remember that cycle. Like at a certain point, an agency is going to be on top. They're going to be winning all the work. They're going to have all the creative awards. And then that cycle will go through, and that agency will now be on the bottom, and they'll be losing people, and they won't be able to hold on to their best clients. And it moves through cycles. Nothing is awesome forever, and nothing sucks forever. And I found a lot of hope in that because it allowed me to say, well, look, we're going through yet another cycle. And so what we have to do right now as people is try and help each other and try and think about what's going to come next, whenever the next is, whether it's a couple weeks from now or 18 months from now or whatever it is. How do we get ready for what's next? And the big thing that I've tried to do in the past when I talk about this and when I share this is seek out and celebrate stories, like interesting things. And so what I'm going to try and do today is, give you a picture of where I think the future is headed and what some of these megatrends will be. But I also want to tell you some stories because many of you know that that's kind of my style. That's what I do. I tell stories. And so that's what we're going to do. And the first story I want to tell you is something that some of you may recognize. And you're smiling to yourself, I'm guessing, if you do recognize this. But this particular sequence of numbers is something called the Konami Code. And the Konami Code was written by Kazuhisa Hashimoto, who unfortunately passed away just, I think, about a month ago. But he was the creator of this secret code for video games. And what this code allowed you to do is cheat in those video games. And I remember my brother and I used to play this one game in particular. It was called Contra. And the code was a beautiful thing because when we used this code, we would get 30 lives instead of 3. And when we got 30 lives instead of 3, we could actually survive. We could win this game. And it was amazing. And I only thought about it years later, like after I became an adult and I started telling stories on stage and all of that, I only thought about that and realized why it was so powerful. Because they could easily, as video game creators, have said, look, if you want to make it through this game, practice more, play harder, like spend more money in the arcade, right? Because we used to have those back then and they weren't a nostalgia thing, right? But instead, they said, look, we're going to give you this code and we're going to let you make it through because that's where you're going to find joy in this game. And what's interesting about that is the code reflected this insight, this really powerful insight that, I'm still talking about 30 years later. And the insight was that the people who understand people always win. The people who understand people, like what motivates people, win. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that because really what I do when I think about trends and when I think about this non-obvious way of thinking is I observe people. And part of it is behavioral psychology, part of it's storytelling from the marketing world, and part of it is just choosing to pay attention. And if there's anything that I could share with you as this one lesson that really has changed everything about how I see the world and how I believe non-obvious thinkers, this category of people that I call non-obvious thinkers, see the world, it's that they are better at observing people. They understand what people need in a particular moment, and then they find ways to deliver that, either by being leaders and helping them and by inspiring them, or by starting businesses as an entrepreneur that creates products and services that people need. And these are really powerful ways for people to engage with one another. So that to me is this really core insight. But I think that now, as I said before, we're living in this disrupted world. And so I want to talk about a couple of the big shifts that have happened and how I think we need to contend with those. And the first big shift is how we're buying things, the way we choose to buy things and the way that products and services are delivered to us. And obviously there's even more disruption now because of the whole virus world that we're living in at the moment. But for some time now, you've had things that would never have been possible in the past. You can order a mattress and get it delivered straight to your home. You can buy these products that look like they're candies or popsicles, but they're actually sponges and soaps at this place called Donut Love. You can go to certain Whole Food locations, probably not now so much, but you used to be able to go to certain Whole Foods locations. Oh, by the way, this is one of those dangers, right? I look at this slide and I'm kind of thinking in my head, wow, yeah, I guess they're not doing this anymore. But you used to be able to go to certain Whole Food locations and they would chop your fruits and vegetables for you. There's all sorts of new products that were coming out into the market for telling you if your food's gone bad, or this June Intelligent Oven, which is the most adulting product ever, where you just stick your food in and it decides how long to cook it for you. Hugely valuable now because we've got an entire population of people who are not used to cooking, who are now forced to figure out how to cook because they can't go to restaurants the way that they used to go to in the past, at least for the intermediate term right now. You've got these products, which are aged for as little as 2 days. This whiskey's aged for as little as 2 days before you can now consume it, right? Because sometimes we're getting this fatalistic view of we don't know what we're going to be doing 50 years from now. So can we really afford to wait for that whiskey to age? I don't know. It's a lot of anxiety, right? And I want to talk about that. Products like this, where you don't have to go to the gas station anymore. You just go onto the app in certain destinations. It used to be in San Francisco. I'm not sure if it's still running at the moment, but you can get your car refueled with a mobile fuel truck that drives right up to your car. So there's all of this disruption in the way that we used to buy things. And some of it comes to technology. And I think technology and our relationship with technology has sort of become this double-edged sword, right? So technology can unite us, and it can also isolate us. And there's many ways that we see this playing out, right? So brands are trying to find new ways to inject themselves into that conversation. Budweiser did this reverse selfie label on their beer. So now when you take a selfie, like the beer comes out correctly, which is obviously the most important thing in a selfie, to make sure the brand looks right. Sarcasm. There's this awesome innovation startup company called Care Coach that creates virtual avatars for elderly people to help provide companionship through this avatar that's voiced by a real human behind it. There's this guy who's strangely happy with his holographic wife, which is a real product that you can buy out of Japan. And there's these things, which, I mean, obviously this is probably inappropriate considering our 6-foot ban on being too close to one another, and this doesn't exactly look like 6 feet, but this was a art project called the Focus Tube that was in response to this idea that there's so much stimulus outside in the world that, like, what if we just basically put this weird circus sock on our faces and allowed us to have interaction directly with one person, which is still a powerful idea, right? And perhaps even more powerful today because we're forced to disconnect and stay away from one another because of social distancing and all of the things that are starting to come into our culture that we're talking about. The third big thing that has created this shift that I'm really have been tracking for, I think, more than 10 years now, is the idea that we're in the middle of a believability crisis that every year just seems to be getting worse and worse. And it's been escalating for some time. I mean, decades ago, we had marketing and advertising telling you things like doctors smoke Camels more than any other cigarette, so it must be okay for you. We've had beauty advertising messages that have been created not to make us look to feel better about ourselves, but actually the opposite, right? They want us to feel inadequate so that we have to go off and get something. We have to go up and pick up something new. I mean, this was a real ad from Levi's that said hotness comes in all shapes and sizes, and then shows you 4 women who are basically the same size. And so it's hard to feel good after seeing something like that. And we see all of these messages in marketing and advertising frequently. And look, I'm criticizing an industry that I've spent most of my working life being part of. And sometimes I've been part of these things, and it doesn't feel great to look back and know that, yeah, I was creating these sorts of things where we were telling people that Cocoa Krispies boosts your immunity. Well, really? How is that possible, right? And how can it be all natural, by the way? There's no such thing as a Cocoa Krispie tree, right? And there's funny examples. I mean, I use this one on stage all the time. Donut seeds, right? I mean, look at that. There's no donut seeds, right? We figured out what these are. These are Cheerios. But the problem is, like, it's a fabrication. And so we get used to seeing these things. And as a result of that, we feel that we're being tricked. We feel like we're being lied to. And even when there's something that tells us that they're not going to lie, like, we even then feel like, look, there's a little bit of a disconnect here. Like, I'm not sure if I can trust this. I'm not sure if I can trust what I see. Now, it's not just marketing, right? It's also media. And we see these miracle stories. And chances are over the next several months, we're going to see more and more of these miracle stories. These unbelievable solution stories. Yeah, a virus vaccine has been developed, or there's another hoax going around that has been widely debunked, that if you hold your breath for 10 seconds, like, you can tell if you have the virus, which is untrue. So we're going to have to get smarter as consumers of media to understand whether something's fake or real. So let's do a quick poll, a quick study right now. I'm going to share with you 3 stories in particular, and I want you to decide for each one of them whether it's fake or whether it's real, and then I'll reveal the truth about each story at the end. So the first story is chemical in McDonald's fries could cure baldness. First story. Second story, bumblebee vomit. Scientists are no longer ignoring it. Imagine the exclamation point, if you will. Third story, sassy seal accidentally slaps man across the face with an octopus. So these are the 3 stories, and I want you to decide for yourself whether each one is true or false. And I'll give you a quick pause, think about it. And now let's do a reveal. So, first story, real. Chemical in McDonald's fries could cure baldness. Could this possibly be real? Because some scientists find a chemical that could regrow hair. Some online writer does a quick Google search, finds that that chemical is included in McDonald's fries, puts the pieces together, writes the headline, goes viral, easy, done. That one's real. Second story, sassy seal accidentally slaps man across the face. Real. You can actually Google this video. It was the slap heard around New Zealand. Fascinating headline. And it's a real article. It's crazy. Real video too. Third one, also real. Bumblebee vomit. Scientists are no longer ignoring it. My point with sharing these all real stories with you is they all kind of seem fake at the same time that they're real. And it's hard to tell. And so these are just some of the books that have come out recently, all talking about this same idea, that there's so much noise, there's so much lie out there, that we're in this post-truth, post-trust, as my friend Shiv Singh calls it, era. So what do we do with that? How do we navigate past all of this noise? What will it take to get past this? Well, one thing that we mistakenly believe is if we just continue to capture all of these likes and thumbs up, the crowd will help figure it out for us, right? And I'm realizing that this image is probably on public transport, probably a bad one too. So I'm gonna have to change a lot of these images now, I'm realizing. Oh, crazy. But the other thing is, we think speed reading is gonna help, right? And here's a real tool that quickly flashes through lots of different things and says, this is how you can read faster. And it's tough because that isn't going to solve the problem. You can't get smarter by consuming everything. Because the challenge is, if you're trying to consume everything in that moment, it's sort of like being hungry and going to one of these competitions that we uniquely have in America. And I know I have a bunch of folks on the call who are based outside of America. So you may be unfamiliar with these competitions that are uniquely American, but it's eat as many hot dogs as you can in a minute or 5 minutes or whatever the world record is. And it's disgusting. But when you do something like that, you're not going to feel better at the end of it. You might not be hungry, but you won't feel better. And so instead of trying to do that, instead of trying to capture everything, I often say, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Isaac Asimov, that people should try more to be a speed reader rather than a speed understander. Because if you can be a speed reader, if you could be a speed understander, then you're not focused on trying to consume everything, right? You're not focused on trying to navigate everything and figure out what to pay attention to without understanding the meaning behind it. And one of the biggest challenges that makes this difficult is that we're living in, for the first moment in human history, we're living in a time where it's possible to be more informed and more narrow-minded at the same time. And think about that for a second, right? Because for a long, long time, if you read more, if you consumed more, you would get smarter. And unfortunately today, we're living in a time where you can consume a lot and end up being more ignorant about everything else that's in the world, because we're encouraged to boil our beliefs down as deeply as we can to just that one little thing. And it's very unnatural because humans don't think like that. Like, we need more nuance. We need more wide-ranging opinions. And when we don't get them, when we're just reinforced that same thing through social media over and over again that says, this is the narrative, this is the way the world is, and anyone who doesn't think that, anyone who doesn't think like you must be an idiot, we have a big problem. because we can't approach one another anymore. We can't have discussions with one another anymore. And so we have to be able to do something else. We have to be able to get past that. Now, my solution that I often talk about is what I call non-obvious thinking. And non-obvious thinking is the idea that we can think different. We can be different. And one of the things I wrote about, and I wrote about this in a guidebook that I created for marketing purposes, was all about positioning, which is how to be different. That's what positioning, if you're a marketing guy like me, that's what you call positioning, which is being different. And if you imagine this, this chart where you've got being desired on one side, either highly desired or not as desired, and different, being very differentiated versus not so differentiated. If you imagine a quadrant chart there, if you're ordinary, then you may be desired, but you're not really different. Now, on the flip side, if you are very different, but nobody cares or nobody wants it, then you're just weird, which is not a good place to be. The worst place to be is when no one wants it and it's not differentiated at all. And that's just stupid. I mean, why would anyone want to be there? But if you can be different and desired, in demand, then I think you can benefit from this idea of being a non-obvious thinker. So let's talk about what it takes to be a non-obvious thinker. And with the rest of the time together, what I'm going to share with you is 5 very quick tips for what it takes to be a non-obvious thinker. And then we're going to talk about the megatrends. And I'm going to give you a very quick summary of each one of them, along with a stealable idea for each one. So how to put it into action. So this second part of the presentation is going to go very fast. And the good news is you will be able to access the recorded version of this presentation. So if you're listening in right now, you will get a link after the presentation with a recorded version. So you'll be able to consume this later, share it with a colleague, someone else. And the other thing is I'm going to be announcing at the end of this presentation something that I haven't announced before, which is a brand new project that's going to be coming out in a little over 3 weeks. And all of you who are listening right now will get a chance to get access to that entirely for free. So that's what I'm going to be announcing at the end. So that's what we have in store for us. I hope you're still with me. I hope the pacing of this is good. And we've got more to go. We've got the trends to go, and we've got the mindsets to go. So let's keep rolling. Let's keep going. The 5 mindsets of non-obvious thinkers, and this is directly from Non-Obvious Megatrends, the book. In one of the chapters, I talk about these 5 specific habits. And one of them I've already talked about, which is be observant. Like, see what other people don't see what others miss. And being more observant is a really powerful way to basically pay attention. And I think we have become really good at not paying attention because we have a lot of things to distract us, right? We don't need to avoid waiting in line, but we do because we have our phones with us all the time and we always have something to look at. And so we don't pay attention. We don't practice our ability to be observant. And one of the stories that I often tell from the stage is of the founding idea of Starbucks. And if you think about what Howard Schultz did when he came up with this concept of Starbucks, he was walking down the street in Milan at a trade show, and he saw all of these coffee shops. And that's what inspired him to create Starbucks. And I know that this is going to get harder for many reasons because, that experience of him walking down the street in Italy, I mean, you can imagine how much that has changed in itself, right? So it's going to get harder to be observant, but there are many places and many ways that we will be able to pay attention to what people are doing, how they're interacting with one another, and we're going to have to practice that. So that's important. Be observant. Being curious is also super important. It's asking questions. Ask why. Be fickle is the ability to move on. The analogy I often use for that is that we want to be able to save an idea without necessarily dwelling on it or trying to make meaning of it exactly in that moment, because sometimes we need time for it to be meaningful. Then be thoughtful, take time to think, and be elegant. Choose the words deliberately. So let me show you very visually what this process looks like for me, and very quickly. So here are some of the books that I have on my bookshelf. Totally unique, different, useless information, literally, but sometimes that useless information turns up interesting stories and a way of thinking about the world that's a little bit different. So that's why I have these, in order to inspire that type of thinking. When I read books, this is how I read them. I use these colored tabs to save the most interesting ideas. I'm picturing a book here, by my friend Francesca Gino. That's a fantastic book. So it has a lot of tabs in it. Many books that I read don't get nearly this many tabs, but I do read them and save the interesting ideas before I put it back on my shelf, because I want to capture these ideas in a way that's useful for me over time. When I'm engaging my curiosity, which was another one of the habits, I do that often by buying a magazine that's not targeted at me. So here you'll see a bunch of different magazines pictured. You see Modern Farmer magazine, you see Teen Vogue magazine, the Airbnb magazine. Like, these are all examples of unique, different types of magazines for various things, many of which I'm not really all that excited about. I mean, there's a magazine up at the top there all about knives. I'm not a knives person. I probably have like kitchen knives and that's it. I don't even have a real hunting knife. But by reading a magazine like that, I'm stepping into someone else's world. And it's really important to do that. And I love doing it personally. I love doing it with print, because it's hard to do that digitally, because a lot of times what happens is what you see is algorithmically served to you based on whatever platform you're on thinks you want to read. So Facebook's never going to show me a story about knives because Facebook already knows that I'm not interested in knives. Could I be interested? Sure, but they're not going to serve it to me, right? And so the challenge is I never get exposed to that, and therefore I never get the chance to see something different or to experience a world of something that's outside of my knowledge. The other problem with that is we reinforce our worldview and we get angry at anything that doesn't fit that. And so a lot of times what will happen is somebody will post a political story. If I don't like it, maybe I'll click the angry button. And then Facebook will look at that click of the angry button and say, oh, you must enjoy being angry. Here's more articles to make you angry, right? That's how the algorithm works, because it thinks it knows what you want. And the only way we can break past that, the only way, is through consuming the exact same thing that everyone else is getting. And at least with a print magazine, you can still do that. There's no algorithmic way that print magazine so far can tell who you are. Now, you may get a geographic edition based on where you live or based on where you bought it, but that's about it. Otherwise, it's the same experience. So that's really powerful. But when you start to put those pieces together, what it ends up doing is giving you this picture that you can paint of the world. And so this image is an example of how all of these pieces start to come together through my trend process. And as I put these pieces together and I think about this trend process, eventually I develop these trends. And every year there's been 15 new trends. And these are just some of the past trends from earlier editions of the book. But like I said, what we're talking about today is Megatrends, the Megatrends book. And this is the 10th edition. It's the final edition. And many of you have asked me in the past, like, well, why is it the last one? Like, why aren't you doing this anymore? And the biggest reason is because, to be honest with you, it just felt like the right moment for me to step away from this. It takes a lot of work every year. And I really wanted to spend my time doing more than just thinking about trends. So I'll still be thinking about trends. I'll still be sharing them through digital tools, articles, things like that. But this new version of the book every year that's a fully rewritten, printed edition of the book is not going to be the way we do it moving forward. So I'll still share trend insights, but it's going to change. And one of the ways it's going to change is this non-obvious platform is going to get much bigger. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But let me show you, right before we move into the trends, what this process looks like for me visually in a time-lapse video. So this is the process of identifying themes for various stories. And this is a time-lapse video that my wife took, just kind of holding the phone over my shoulder as I was flipping through these different stories and allocating themes to each one of the stories. So what you're seeing here is lots of different stories collected, curated, and then organized based on these big themes. And then these themes, I start to aggregate them together and say, okay, they all align to this one big idea. And in this case, it was a trend that I called truthing, which was people seeking the truth for themselves. And that eventually goes into a chapter, and the chapter goes into a book. So that's the process in a very quick time lapse of how these trends are decided and how they're determined. One of the things that we did that was really interesting, and I'll share in the email that I send to all of you with the recording of this webinar, I'll also share a link to this story, which was a story that a team of journalists did on this process. And as part of that story, they did a photo shoot. And they came in with a pretty interesting idea for the photo shoot and said, look, it's going to take a while to set up, but we think it's going to be worth it. So of course, I said yes. And this is what we ended up with in that photo shoot. Me covered head to toe in Post-it notes. And it's not photoshopped. We actually stuck all of those on. And there's a video on my Instagram feed of the process of doing that, if you want to go behind the scenes a little bit. But this is my way and their idea of how to bring to life this sense of us having to navigate the noise to figure out what to pay attention to. And that's really what I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do. And so I want to share with you the result of that. And this is what I promised to you, and this is kind of the meat of all of the trends work, which is what are the non-obvious trends that are changing our culture, and how will they maybe shift now that our culture has fundamentally changed just in the last couple of weeks? Like, and what do we do to get ready for that future? Because a non-obvious trend to me is a unique curated observation of the accelerating present. That's my definition of a non-obvious trend. And the important part of that is the accelerating present, because look, the present is vastly accelerating right now. We see that. We all know that. And so our challenge is, how do we get past that? Like, how do we survive that? And how do we embrace that disruption in a way that allows us to be ready for the next wave of the cycle, whenever that happens? So the first trend I want to talk about is something I called amplified identity. And amplified identity was the idea that individualism across many different phases is rising globally in many countries. And therefore, people have been cultivating how they're perceived, becoming stars, creating platforms of their own, and also having this downside of being criticized, being bullied, and having their identity challenged in that way. One of the stories that I talked about in the book was a group of mainly young men in Japan called the hikikomori, which was strangely prescient, this group of young men who have not left their rooms or their houses in months and sometimes years. They rely on family to bring them whatever they need. They are socially isolated. I didn't realize at the time that I wrote it that it would be such a topic that many of us would have to be forced to contend with. But what's been fascinating about this group is how they see their identity in the social isolation of what they've become. And there's some very, very good stories about the hikikomori. And I suggest strongly that you, after this, not to give you homework, the professor side of me coming out, but you probably have a little more time to do some reading. And so take advantage of that, right? Google search that, or if you have the Non-Obvious Megatrends book, in the footnotes for the book, there's a bunch of great articles about this group. You should definitely check that out. The other piece of this, though, is as we move our identities online, the person we choose to be on different platforms is different. So who I am on LinkedIn may be a little bit different, or maybe a lot different from who I am on Facebook, who I am on Instagram, not on Tinder. I'd be in a lot of trouble if I was. But the point is, we have all of these digital platforms that we are on, and the way we present ourselves there is going to shift. And now that we are increasingly relying upon these digital tools to connect with the people who are in our network, because we can't do it in person the way we used to, that's going to be a much bigger deal as well. So the stealable idea, the thing that I promised you across each one of these trends, the stealable idea behind this one is, how do we find a way to embrace what I call our identity divide? The fact that we are different on these different platforms. And so there is going to be a divide, right? It's really difficult, and maybe perhaps impossible, to be our entire authentic self in everything that we post all the time on every platform. We can't. It's probably hard to do that in person too. But now we're going to be subdividing this. Who do I want to be on this platform? Who do I want to connect with? What do I choose to share over here versus over there? If we weren't doing that before, more people will be doing it now. And so the opportunity that that presents, and at least the thing to think about that we need to focus on, is how do we embrace that divide and not make it something that is an object to be accused of, as in, oh, you're not your real self over here because you're doing something different over here. Well, we use these different tools for different things, right? And we have to be able to start embracing that. So that's the first mega trend. The second big mega trend is instant knowledge. And instant knowledge is the sense that we now expect to get bite-sized knowledge on demand and learn anything more quickly. And this one is certainly going to dramatically accelerate because a lot of kids, our kids included, are out of school right now. People are, in general, moving towards getting educated or educating themselves on all sorts of topics online and have been for a long time. But now it's going to accelerate even more. And so how do we get ready for that type of world? One of the fascinating and scary stories I read when I was researching this trend to write about it was an 8-year-old who taught himself how to drive because he wanted to go to McDonald's. And he just found a YouTube video and did it. That's really concerning, but also think about that 8-year-old and the world that he is living in now and the world that he's going to grow up in, where this type of learning is going to be much more commonplace. And in some cases, the only option if we're in a situation like we are right now. The tasty cooking tutorial videos, which already had 500 million views per month, helping people decide on that all-important question of what's for dinner every day, they're going to dramatically accelerate too, because as I said before, there's a lot of people who are not used to cooking who are now going to have to figure out how to make something, because you can't just have cereal or toast every day. You gotta have something else, right? So the way that we learn, the way that we get knowledge is really, really shifting. And one of the other things that I alluded to before, which has been a big, big deal for us in the non-obvious company, is using this trend to drive the next phase of what we create. So one of the big questions I'm often asked about these trends is, okay, how do we use them? Like, how do we make money off of them? Or how do we pivot our business? Or what do we do to make this trend something that we can act upon? And this is a good example because when we started doing a lot of the research around instant learning, we realized that there's a big opportunity here in terms of how people learn how to do just about anything. So these are a range of guidebooks that we currently have either in production or out. The 5 that are at the top are already available out there and shipping from Amazon or from any bookstore you can order from. They're already out and available. The other ones below are all in progress. They're guidebooks in the works. And the idea of each one of them is that we are going to try and give people a chance to learn these topics on their own in a human way, in a not guidebook for idiots, guidebook for dummies way. Because one of the central beliefs of this whole series is it's smart advice for smart people. And I believe that that's what we ultimately want. Like, we want to help people get smarter faster. And we're not living in a time anymore. And I wrote a whole article on this that I posted on LinkedIn and a bunch of other places several months ago. I don't believe we're living in a time anymore where people want to see themselves as idiots and dummies and just throw up their hands and say, oh, I'm such a dummy. I don't even know. I don't think we live in that world anymore. I think we live in a world where people say, look, I can figure that out. Now, sometimes I don't want to because it's too much work. And so I'll get help from someone else or I'll hire someone. But we're going to be moving into this world where we got to figure stuff out. We got to have that mentality of I can figure it out. And the content we consume, whether it's a book or an online course or a webinar like this, the content we consume has got to help us to be able to take that mindset and be someone who can figure out things faster, because those are the people who will adjust faster. Those are the people who will say, look, this thing that I used to do, this thing that I used to make money on is not there anymore. So what am I going to do next? Am I going to just give up? Or am I going to train myself? Am I going to get smarter so that I can figure out what to do next? Like, there's an opportunity here. And my guess is if you're listening to this webinar, you're one of those people who's thinking already in their mind, I'm going to figure this out. You may not have the answer yet, which is okay. I don't have the answer yet, or maybe ever. But the point is not that we always have the answer. The point is we're going to continually try and figure it out. And that is the mentality that I think will allow you and me and anyone else who thinks like us to be successful, even as the world changes around us. Next big trend is what I called ungendering. And ungendering was this idea that the traditional gender divisions that we used to use are being replaced with a much more fluid sense of gender identity. People are sending emails with a signature on their email signature that says, my pronouns, my preferred pronouns are him or her or she or we, and are they. And that's a way of defining oneself based on how you see your gender in the world. And so one of the big trends that I wrote about several years ago was something I called fierce femininity. And it was about how women were being portrayed in fashion, in movies, and it was one of the indications of this. And what's fascinating about this particular megatrend, and most of them actually, is that each one of them takes into account some of the past trends that were predicted in one of the previous years of the book. And so what you'll see in Megatrends, in the book Megatrends, if you haven't picked it up already, is at the end of each chapter, about a megatrend, you'll see a list of the previous trends that sort of provided a roadmap to get to this megatrend. And doing that, I got to say, as an author, doing that was a really interesting and sobering exercise for me, because sometimes I would look at these trends and say, wow, this thread is amazing, right? Like, for example, with this one, with ungendering, I had a trend in 2013 that I called Powered by Women. And then in 2017, it was Fierce Femininity. And then in 2018, it was Ungendered. And then in 2019, it was Muddled Masculinity. And then now it's this ungendering trend that encompasses all of those. And the thread is really clear. And sometimes I'd look back on some of the trends and I'd say, that doesn't ladder up to anything. I don't know what I was thinking. And the truth is, I need those too, because those made the thinking of the later versions and the thinking of the new book better. Because when I can look back and say, that didn't work out, that didn't pan out, that didn't accelerate the way that I thought it was, it gives me a chance to learn something from that. And if you're a longtime reader of the guide series, you know that I don't hold any of that back. So at the back of the book, every edition of the book for the last 4 years, there's been a detailed appendix with every past trend along with a letter grade for how that trend performed over time. Because I'm not trying to hide any of this. I'm trying to share that this is how we need to think. And to be honest with you, this is how we need to take ownership of our own ideas and take responsibility for the things that we've put out there. Right? And I think that we all have a chance to be examples to do that, because there's a lot of people who will just share the latest falsehood, and then when it's proven wrong, totally switch, go the opposite direction, and take no responsibility at all. And I don't think any of us want to be a person like that. And so we can provide the example, right? When we choose to share something on social media or otherwise, have we done enough work to make sure that it's true, that it's right? Because if we don't, then we're adding to the noise and we're adding to this believability crisis, and we're not doing anything to help. So how do we get past that, right? So anyway, back to this particular trend. There is another great example of Barbie incorporating boys into their advertising for the first time. And these stories, and I have so many more of them. I mean, I wish I could take you through kind of the gallery, the full gallery, just so you know. I mean, this presentation here, for every one of these megatrends, I have probably 6 or 7 other slides with other images that I will use for various talks, depending on where I want to focus. And by the way, I will usually never do all 10 megatrends in one presentation because it's just too much. So I am going a little fast, and I realize that. But the reason is because I wanted to give you all 10 and not skip any. But usually in a talk, I'll have more examples and I won't do that. But with this one in particular, I think the learnable lesson here is, how do we have more gender empathy? So how do we have empathy for that belief, that new way that people see gender as being fluid? really important. All right, let's pick up the pace a little bit because I know that I've got to finish within this hour. That's what I promised you. So we're going to rock it through, and we're going to make it and have some great lessons at the end, including the surprise that I promised you. So stay with me. I know it's hard to pay attention on your own for an hour. Hopefully you haven't lost concentration or zoned out, but take a deep breath. Let's get back into it. We're rocking through. And by the way, in case you did lose a little bit of focus, don't worry. The video will be there for you to look at afterwards. And so you can take a little more time with this if you want. Pause on any one of these. If you want to really look at the descriptions, you'll be able to do all that. So the next mega trend is revivalism. And revivalism is the idea that when we're overwhelmed by technology, we seek out past experiences. We seek out things that offer us nostalgia, things that offer us more of a trustworthy time from the past. So for example, we are listening to vinyl music again, right? Kodak is bringing back film because some diehard photographers, they want to shoot on film again. We've got Picard, which I'm super excited about because I'm a big Trekkie. I love this, and Picard is easily the best leader model of any past character. I mean, I'm happy to debate that with anybody, but I know I'm right. But they're even bringing back He-Man, which, I mean, let's be honest, He-Man was not good the first time around. But they're still bringing back He-Man because it's just another one of those things that reminds people of their youth. I mean, we're seeking these more analog ways to reconnect. We're playing board games again. These old handheld games that I used to play when I was a kid, those are coming back. I even read a story in Pennsylvania about typewriter classes. Like they're offering typewriter classes for kids. These are all ways that people are rediscovering the power of the analog. And it was a sort of a natural reaction, if you think about it, to all of this technology. And what's fascinating is this was already happening at the point when now we have all of these changes in the world because of the virus. And if you think about it, some of the changes are sort of leading people back to the analog as well. People are staying home more and maybe playing more board games. They're reconnecting more because they have to. But this was already happening even before any of that started. Next big trend is what I call the human mode. And the human mode is that when technology does isolate us from one another, sorry about that. When technology does isolate us from one another, people are seeking out and finding value in these authentic experiences. Now, sometimes they're physical. I get that that's going to be harder now to do. But people are finding new ways to bring that back together even now. I mean, we have, like, my wife was playing a board game, like a card game, with friends over virtual streaming. People are finding new ways to reconnect with one another through doing things like that. They're watching shared experiences. I just posted a story actually about musicians doing live shows, streaming live shows from their homes because they have a home studio. And so now they're streaming all of this content, and you can consume it and sort of feel like it's a one-to-one experience. So there are ways that people are rediscovering the human mode, not only through experiences, but also through like design. So this was one example I shared of humanity back in design. So these are shampoo bottles that were created with the lines or dots based on whether it's shampoo or conditioner, so that people who are visually impaired can tell the difference between them. So there's more humanity and empathy in product design, as an example. Here's another great example. So previous to the virus, pre-virus, we need like lingo for this, I think, but before virus, before coronavirus, I would talk about the relaxed lane at the checkout, grocery store checkout. So for older people who needed a little more time to check out, who didn't want to use the automated system, they wanted to actually check out with someone. And on the right, you'll see an image of something similar, which is empathy in stores that are opening early for seniors, so that the seniors can get their supplies and not have to deal with lots and lots of people all coming and trying to get the same thing at the same time. These are all examples of bringing more of that empathy to the experience. Starbucks having sign language only stores, same thing. Like this whole sense of how do we bring more empathy back into our experience, made with empathy as a strategy, because now maybe more than ever, like we're going to need that empathy. We're going to need to bring that empathy back in because we need it from one another. Next big megatrend I want to share with you is attention wealth. And attention wealth is the idea that in an information economy, our attention is worth more. And we're skeptical, but we need the spectacles to actually help that stand out and capture our attention. So the way we give attention and what we give attention to is dramatically shifting. So Red Bull for a long time has shifted away from being an energy drink to being a media company, producing magazines and experiences and all sorts of stuff. You have these examples of virtual influencers. So Hatsune Miku, which is an animated character, or Lil Michaela, which is a AI-generated influencer, mainly on Instagram. She is at the right. And in this particular picture, she's holding the arm of her real-life boyfriend, who's human. And recently, they had a big story where she broke up with her real-life boyfriend. So a real-life human guy dating a digitally created avatar influencer, female, and that's what we're seeing to capture our attention now. And what all of these things do is they end up capturing our attention because they use the one most powerful thing that I've told people over and over again in the past as a marketer and also as a professor who's taught marketing and influence and speaking and storytelling to my students. The one thing I've told people over and over is we have to bring those stories back. We have to bring the story. We have to lead with the story because that's what captures people's attention. They pay attention to stories. They love stories. We're hardwired for that. And anyone who's ever done storytelling or done improv training or done any of these things can tell you the exact same thing. That is a true statement of what people pay attention to. And the people who, I still remember, this was a conclusion from an amazing event that I go to every time it comes around in the past, and went to the last time, called Future of Storytelling. The conclusion there, which was really powerful and has stuck with me, is the people who control the stories control the world. And that is a powerful and true statement, because if you think about it, the ones who tell the narrative and have it believed are the ones who end up with the power to influence. And so when you think about that, it reminds us that we really need to focus on these stories. These are critical things for us. So let's keep going. Purposeful profit, which is a big trend to make sure that companies are more sustainable, they're more ethical, and they're taking stands on issues. So Patagonia has done this for a long time with everything that they do. Jose Andres has done this for a long time. And what they all say is stand for something bigger. Like, it's not enough to just put a statement out. We have to actually stand for something. We have to stand for something bigger. And that's what this particular trend, the purposeful profit trend, says. So we have to be able to have something that's a bigger idea out there, especially now. Abundance of data is another big trend. And this is just the idea that we have so much data out there, and a lot of it is just useless. It's crap. Or it's totally misinterpreted. And if there's one book, aside from Megatrends, that I highly recommend you read right now, it's Factfulness, which came out last year. It was one of the winners of our Non-Obvious Book Awards program. And it's amazing because it gives you a sense of why the world is much better off than you think it is. And if there was any book that we could read right now and benefit from, all of us, it's this book. So I highly recommend this. Right after you get Megatrends, get this one. It will really help you. And what it'll help you figure out is how to ask better questions and seek more insight. Because at the end of the day, like, the data should give us insight. And if we're not getting insight from it, then why are we using it in the first place? Next big trend is protective technology. So protective technology is the sort of technology that we rely on to protect us and to protect our environment. So everything from as simple as the fraud alerts that we get from our credit cards saying, hey, did you make this charge? Did you actually charge $400? Or is it something else? Like, let's capture that early, right? So that's super important. Innovation like this, which is self-healing concrete. So concrete that fixes its own cracks, right? And we have all sorts of innovation like that. And the point of all of this is when we use technology to predict and fix issues, then we're living in a space where the technology is actually helping all of us. And that's powerful. That's beautiful. That's what we want. And that's what we need now, in this world, because we need that innovation to help us get out of this moment that we're in at the moment right now. The last trend that I want to share with you is flux commerce. And flux commerce is the idea that the lines that used to exist between industries are starting to erode, and it's creating this big disruption of business models. And this is all about how we need to predict how this is going to shift so that we can get past it and prepare ourselves for the future. So Apple is a technology company, but they're also creating a bank, and they also have their credit card. Capital One has coffee shops. Crayola, that makes crayons and markers, also is creating makeup. Taco Bell opened a hotel. I mean, all of these are examples of how we need to think about disrupting our business and how we work and changing how we think about that. And now more than ever, we need to be able to do that. So the big final idea I want to share with you, and the real big point of non-obvious thinking before I share this new project, is can we be speed understanders instead of speed readers? Can we focus on seeing the world and paying attention to what really matters instead of trying to consume everything? The last thing I want to give you is this new project. So I'm collaborating with all of the authors of all of the non-obvious guides, as well as between 15 and 20 other amazing smart professionals, to quickly put together the non-obvious guide to virtual meetings and remote work when you just can't be there in person. And the big thing that I think makes this book a little bit different, and I've done a lot of research on this, and I've also spent a lot of time doing virtual meetings myself, hosting them, and also working remotely myself. And the big thing that's different here is a lot of the books that you'll see on this topic are focused on sharing why it's optimal to do that. And I think we're in a world right now where many of us are forced to do it. We may want to go and connect with people in person. We may want to go to events, but we can't. We have to do things virtually. And so what does it take to be effective in a virtual meeting? How do you run a virtual meeting? How do you hire a virtual team member? What does it take to be effective when you have to work remotely, when the kids are around, when there's lots of distraction? What are the tips and tricks to be able to do that as well? So if you're already on the list for this webinar, when you get the email with the recorded session, you'll also get details on how to get your free copy of this book, which will be out in the middle of April. So it's 3 weeks away, approximately. Middle of April, this will be available for free. If you don't already get my email on Thursday mornings, this is the email to subscribe to get that. So you can go there and you can subscribe for that. And I want to leave you with one final big thought, which is we all have the chance to support one another through all of these times. We've created a community to help people do that. We call it the Non-Obvious Nation. So if you search that on Facebook and you're on Facebook, you can join that community and just be part of sharing ideas. You can also connect directly with me because I believe that we have to help each other. And I want to try and be a resource to do that for you. So here's another photo from that photo shoot of me having a cup of coffee and reading my paper. And this is my personal email address. If you want to connect with me, if you need advice on something, if you want to just share your feedback, or if you had a question that we didn't really get a chance to go through. I didn't do a Q&A during this webinar, but I want to give you a chance to ask any of those things. So feel free to email me directly. This is how to get in touch with me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate that things are changing rapidly, and I know that your time is super valuable, and I really appreciate you spending it on this webinar. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for keeping your sense of optimism and being a non-obvious thinker. I hope this webinar helped you to do that just a little bit, and I'm looking forward to staying connected with all of you. So thank you. I will stop the share now. I will go off and I'll respond to your questions and comments and everything like that on the side in the chat, as well as through email. So thank you for joining, and thank you for everything you do.